Welcome to the Attract Your Ideal Clients podcast. This show is for entrepreneurs who sell their expertise, including trainers, consultants, and coaches looking for real-world, actionable marketing advice to help them identify their competitive strengths, find and fix the marketing bottlenecks that are holding them back, and confidently make the right marketing decisions for their unique business. Today, I'm talking with Michele Delgado from Hartmetrics about ways that she uses content marketing to attract her ideal clients, including starting with a clear picture of your targeted audience, why great content is often essential for establishing your credibility with prospects, and how she dials in her LinkedIn presence to increase her relevance with her target market. Quick note, I've recently updated the show name from Attract Your Ideal Customers to Attract Your Ideal Clients to align more with the specific needs of trainers, consultants, and coaches. Now, before we get started, if you've hit a plateau in your training, consulting, or coaching business, I want to invite you to visit marcusschaller.com/subscribe for weekly troubleshooting guides and tips to help you find and fix the weak spots in your marketing that are holding you back, fine-tune your positioning and marketing strategy, and start growing again by attracting more of your ideal clients. Again, that's marcusschaller.com/subscribe. So let's start out. We talked a couple of times in the last couple of weeks, particularly about content and using content as a trainer, as a consultant, as a coach to really, not only reach and attract your ideal clients, but be able to actually start to serve them before they even become clients, right? To be able to help start helping them solve their problem, maybe in a lot of times before you've ever met or even heard of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we talked about diving into, which I'm very interested, like a lot of people, but getting into the granular, dirty details of this is really how the tools are changing, right? So, yes, we're going to talk about AI, right? But we're not going to just talk about like, ooh, AI is so great. We're going to talk about specific ways that you've been using it, right, to help you be able to create and share value through content. But let's just start with a high level view. Can you just give listeners an idea of like quickly what you do and
Sure.
how you work with clients, the kind of problems you solve, and then we can talk a little bit about your general content approach.
Sure. So I am a business consultant and coach, and I do leadership coaching and individual personal life coaching, if you will. My main focus is I help people who get stuck in that negative storytelling. We sometimes call it imposter syndrome. And I help them recognize what the negative story is that's keeping them stuck and then rewrite it. Because sometimes they don't even know what the negative story is. They just think this is the way it is. And it doesn't have to be that way. So I help them rewrite that story and why we want to rewrite that story is so that we can become more productive. We can have more valuable time and more energy to do the things that we want to do, whether it's, goals in work or better relationships at home, whatever that looks like. I service people who are solopreneurs, independent individual contributors, small business owners. I do some speaking engagements on this topic. And I'm really passionate about it because when I was in corporate, before I started my business almost 4 years ago, I found that negative storytelling really becomes like wildfire. It just spreads and spreads, and that toxicity can really put things to a screeching halt. So we had to think about more positive ways to work in the workplace. And this is why I'm passionate about it. I think that there's a lot of noise out there in the world in general, and especially now. But I think that if we can take one step at a time in the workplace and figure out where does it come from and how we can make a shift, we can have better processes in corporate America, for sure.
And especially even as individuals, right? So as your point, you work with a range of different people, but a lot of your experiences in that corporate arena, which is its own beast, right? Its own kind of special situation. Um,
Yes.
and when you think about your content approach, and just to create a little context for people listening that, maybe they're not really all that familiar with content marketing and how that works, and they post on LinkedIn, but they don't necessarily think in terms of content, right? Content is really, this notion of you're an expert at something, right? And there's an audience slash target audience, target market, ideal client type, whatever you want to call it, who has this problem potentially that you can help solve. And maybe there's a few problems, right? And the idea of content marketing, instead of being like, hey, you should hire me as a coach, right? It's starting to share information with people, expertise with people in a number of ways. It could be LinkedIn posts, it could be blog posts, it could be speaking at events, right? So, just to kind of frame it for people that are listening, it's like it's not just writing blogs, right? Content can be your video, podcasts like this is content, of course. Can you give us a little overview of what your content marketing approach looks like, just kind of on the broad view, so it gives us a little bit of the high level picture of it?
Yes. Great question. When I first started out, I thought, oh, just be visible, whatever that looked like. Kind of like throwing spaghetti at the wall, see what sticks, and hey, somebody likes my post. Hooray. Um, and then it started to become a little bit more focused. It continues to get focused until finally I was, and speaking to other subject experts and coaches and people in this field a lot longer than I am, I realized I had to get even more specific. And so I mainly hang out on LinkedIn. I do podcasts like this and other speaking engagements, and I really try and focus on that specific, changing a negative storytelling or a negative mindset into a positive mindset, and what the aha moments are. Even now today, I'm getting even more specific on who is that I want to serve. The one thing that always troubled me, or that I can't seem to embrace, is when someone says, like you said, what's the pain point that they have, or what's the problem you're going to solve? And to me, it's what's the opportunity that you look forward to have? So again, changing the negative to a positive. It's not pain, it's not this, it's, some of my clients are very successful in doing what they do. They're great at what they do, in fact. And yet where's the opportunity to do even more of that? Where is that opportunity to have even more joy in what they're doing without having some of the setbacks? So getting to
Yeah.
that point is the challenge now. Yeah.
A couple of
But a good
things.
challenge.
It's all a good challenge, right? It's all a good challenge. A couple of things that you mentioned that I wanted to drill down into a little bit more. You said about, when you started throwing spaghetti at the wall, which is, I love that metaphor because it's like, it almost exactly what it feels like. You're just like, I have no idea what's going to happen. You're like the Swedish chef on the Muppets, you're just throwing stuff around. And then you mentioned that over time it got more focused. In your recollection, do you remember it being this process where it's because you were throwing spaghetti at the wall that you were discovering what was working, what wasn't working, and that allowed you to get more focus? Or was it like the spaghetti in the wall was just a complete waste of time and you learned it somewhere else by somebody else's advice or something?
No, as a matter of fact, early on, throwing spaghetti at the wall, because I had so many messages, it was resonating with a slew of, different thoughts. People were chiming in or what have you. And we love when people chime in as opposed to just hit like. But, when they chime in or then ask a question, I think I got one today. I had a post, and somebody says, well, how do you stay curious? What does that look like for you? Or what is the impact? I forget what the question was. I haven't responded yet, but it was all those comments that came back that said, huh, this resonated. Oh, let me put that in the good box. That's a keeper. And then those who had, when you're exposed on social media, you're going to get the good, bad, and the ugly. Some people have, negative things to say or things that make no sense. So you kind of parse that and move that to the side. But I think throwing spaghetti up against the wall was a great way to start.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that because I think one of the things that can be challenging for everybody, and I'm a marketer, it's challenging for me. I should know better than this. We think we should know what's going to work ahead of time. We don't. And then when something we try doesn't work the way we hope it does, it can be very disheartening if our expectations are out of line with the reality, right? And especially today with, all we see on LinkedIn is like, here's the 5 things to do to guarantee blah, 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 with marketing or sell. There is no such thing. All this stuff is just raw material from which you can start picking and choosing and trying for yourself. And I just wanted to mention that and highlight that point because, again, for people listening, they're like, yeah, but what's the right way to do it? It's like, you discover it through experimentation, trial and error, throwing spaghetti against the wall, whatever, the way I like to frame it is you use, I got this from one of my favorite books is called The Click Moment. And he talks about, you do these kind of purposeful bets, right? And then you double down on what works. I mean, pretty much life can be boiled down to that, right? If you're constantly doing purposeful bets based on some kind of best guess or strategic, and then you're doubling down on what works. And what happens is this over time, is it seems like what you've realized in your career over the last 4 years, over your time, you see those incremental improvements that you could never have gotten to in 1 or 2 steps.
No, for sure. I didn't have a marketing background before. In our previous conversations, I've mentioned, we had great, you know, uh, grandiose ideas, but then we would take it to market and say, okay, here, make this look pretty and magical. And yes, that looks wonderful, and then run with it. Also a different industry where, it's sold. There's some industries that sell on their own, and there are other industries like the coaching industry that there's a lot of us, and I think that it has to do with building that relationship, and that connection with that person is the key that's going to make it work. Doesn't matter what your content is after that. It's what you bring to the table every time you have a conversation with them. That's the most important part. And it's getting to that to get the
Yeah.
golden ring, as they say,
The
right?
golden ring, the golden ticket from Willy Wonka or whatever. Yeah, it's we. I think you and I talked about this last week about it's all about getting to that conversation.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
because the conversation we talk about relationships a lot, conversation. It's all about like when you're marketing yourself, when you're creating content or you're doing advertising, whatever it is, it's all a best guess, right? It's like, I think this is going to be useful whether you're focusing on the problem side or the opportunity side, whatever angle you're focusing on, and you're doing both, right? But it's like the guess, I think this is going to be useful. Once you're in a conversation with somebody, that's when, I mean, I'm speaking for myself here, so I don't want to speak for you, but from my perspective, that's when like you shush and it's no longer about like the content spewing out of my face. And it's more about now I have the opportunity to actually listen and understand that person's perspective. And there should hopefully be some overlap as far as themes, because otherwise it might not be a good fit. They might not have the problem or the desire, the opportunity that you help them with, but it might not look like anything, right? That you've created in your content. Have you experienced that too, where you want to send them something, but you're
Yes.
already way past that now? Yeah, now you're into the
Yes.
needs of what they want.
Yes, I have. I've had a couple of those samples where the client came to me for one thing, and the prospect, I should say, the next thing you know, we're working on something totally different, which brings much more value. Sometimes, in coaching, you ask the question, um, we'll go back to the basics of what's the pain point, or what keeps you up at night, or what is it that you want to resolve. Um, and they, because you're still building trust, it's a little surfacey, if that's a word. Well, we'll make it a word, surfacey. If you start out with one, and then before you know it, you're staying in that curious mode and tell me more and tell me more, and why is that? And next thing you know, it's a whole other pain point. And now you're getting into, okay, now you're shifting gears as to what else you can offer them or what else you can help them solve. But it could start out with one thing and end up with something else.
And that brings up a really good point about how this balance, and we're talking specifically for trainers, coaches, consultants, people that sell expertise here. I imagine it applies to a lot of different selling situations, but just for context within this realm, right? It's almost like you're exercising two very different skill sets or approaches, right? On the content side, we put on our expert hat, right? We're telling, right? Where some might say that I'm maybe, like preaching or I'm being whatever, right? But by the nature of it today in 2024, it's still very like kind of one direction, right?
Right,
In a lot
right.
of cases. And then when it comes down to a conversation, I'm from my perspective, my favorite client conversations, and this is even when it's more in the original kind of like we're having an intro call or something, is
Yes.
when I can literally almost say nothing and it's like an hour goes by and it's like the person I'm speaking with, quote unquote speaking
Hmm.
with, has gone through this rabbit hole and led themselves through with very little input from me at that point. Maybe some, to your point, some questions or, hey, I noticed you mentioned this and this, whatever. Some reflective responses, that kind of stuff. But ultimately, it's a very different approach, right? Because what I've seen the flip side, I've been the recipient of this, unfortunately, is it's like the person goes in with they still have the expert hat and they're going to let you know it, right? So they give you 5 minutes to kind of tell them a little bit about yourself and then they go right into solution mode. And I know that's a little bit outside the context of what we're going to talk about with content, but I wanted to bring that up because I think for this audience it's an important distinction to make and maybe drill down into a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that about getting into solution mode. Um, when I do discovery calls, and again, it's about the content. The content when you first put it out there is on one specific thing. So my content has really narrowed down to, rewriting that story. What are the outcomes? What are the things, the challenges that happen when we stay in that negative storytelling? So that hopefully is going to bring the person in to say, look, I need help with that. But then when you start to, uh, let that marinate a little bit, you can start to see how you can bring in something else. But don't get to solution solving right away. Stay in that curiosity mode because sometimes I've been on the receiving end. I have a friend who's a coach, and we were doing an exercise together, and she brought me through this thing. And I had that aha moment, and it wasn't anything that she said, like, here, do this. She wasn't spoon feeding me. She was just asking questions. And all of a sudden, I got to that aha moment myself. So that sometimes is like, I don't know, maybe we call that invisible content. It's not really on the screen. It's kind of sitting there for us to kind of get to on our own. But yeah, I think that there's a lot to be said about staying quiet and being curious before getting to any kind of solutions.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons perhaps that coaching, and let's just say coaching in this angle, right? In this instance, is hard to sell in a direct way. It's not like software. It's not like you can bring
No.
some, hey, here, I'm going to take you through this demo. Look at all this. It's like when, in my experience, again, this is just my experience. Um, coaching is something that really is best experienced. Again, using that word, it's like, and I didn't, come to that conclusion on my own. It's from stuff that I've been studying about coaching and advising and consulting. But it is something that like you can describe it to somebody all day long and they'll just be like, yeah, okay, but when they actually experience it the right way,
Oh
it,
yeah.
it's like you don't really have to do much more than just create the space, right, for somebody to experience that. Now, the challenge is, again, creating something that somebody can consume. I don't really like that term, consuming content, but whatever, reading, watching. Eating it, consuming, whatever.
Well,
Um,
we did reference spaghetti on the wall, so
that's
we could
right.
say
They're
eating it.
consuming all the spaghetti I've been flailing out and throwing at them randomly. Um, but consuming, that reading it is, it's like, ooh, it's like that's not really the same experience, right? So I'm
No.
going off on the left turn here, but like what are some ways we can make that more like the experience of actually working with us and having a conversation with us?
I am definitely not the expert, Marcus. You are in this, but what I really loved what you just said, and it just brought up so many things. You said it's an experience, right? So if I think about my past career, which was in travel and hospitality in the travel industry, people go on vacations and travel destinations for the experience. And being agents or operations or account management, we were just the facilitator to help them get on that journey and have that experience. So maybe a far stretch, but as coaches with content, I think the content has to kind of be the brochure, if you will, of let me take you on this journey. And this is what you're going to experience, or this is what you should experience. And then give them the picture of what the outcome could look like.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're giving them, it's almost like scaling experience as much as we can, one to
Yeah,
many. Um, and it goes into like different philosophies as far as how generous one should be with their expertise, right? And there's two arguments. One is, one side of the argument is you just give it all away. Just give, 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 right? And then there's other people that are like more like, hey, just show the what, but not the how and all that. And I understand all the different arguments. I lean toward the give as much as you can because ultimately nothing I share in a video or a podcast or something I write or whatever it is going to replace, in my opinion, the experience of the right person and me working together if we're a good fit, right? Because
absolutely.
they're not lacking for information. What they're hoping for, what's missing is maybe their own aha moments or the space for them to express their challenges or hopes or whatever.
Yeah.
Think about how unusual it is for most of us to have anybody in our lives that just listens to us, right? That's not, I mean,
Does that
just
exist?
does it exist, right? And it's like think about how like just the opportunity for somebody to create that space from an authentic place, from legitimately caring. And so the point is like when we think about content, it all fits into that, right? There has to be some kind of connection to the experience that we provide as coaches, as consultants, as trainers, as experience for sure, right? And so just I like that we're talking about that because content creation, content marketing can so easily be ripped out of context from what it is we're trying to achieve, especially lately. And we'll get into this now with AI, where content has become so commoditized. It has
Yes,
become so, um, I don't want to say dumbed down, but it becomes about its own. It's for its own sake, right? So, how can we write like a dozen articles in 10 minutes using AI? Like it defeats the purpose of what we're trying to do, in my opinion. So maybe what we can do is talk a little bit about like, okay, there are all these tools now, and there's tools that have been around for a decade or more. Like even word processing is a miracle if you think about what it does.
right,
The fact that
right.
you could just write stuff. I'll give you a quick little anecdote, a little funny story. Like back in the day, probably 20 years ago, 19 years ago, it was before really YouTube, certainly before we could do this, right?
Yeah,
I did this, I wanted to create this audio program and it was for real estate agents because I thought, okay, they can, I had written this book on lead generation. I just thought it could be useful for that industry, right? So I created this audio program and I did the old school Tony Robbins like CD-ROM with the package, right? You remember those things? You could stick the CDs in. And I remember like spending like 4 months creating this thing. I was so proud of it. And I sold like one. I sold like one of them. So I have
are
battles.
they in the Smithsonian now?
Oh my God, it's right next to C3PO. I'm so proud of it. Yeah, right next to Archie Bunker's chair in the Smithsonian Institute. But I'm just sharing that because it can be heartbreaking when you pour your heart and soul into something, right? Today we don't have that problem, right? There's nobody listening to this that is going like, yeah, that's really a pain. I have to, do those CD-ROMs. I have to go to Kinko's and do the cutting of the jewel case covers, right? We have the flip side of that. We have the flip side is it's so easy to broadcast content now that arguably the fact that we don't have to spend 4 months actually doing it, can impact the quality a bit. Let's just say it that way, right?
Well,
So
everybody's an author these days.
yes. Oh, no, no, I'll give you one better. Apparently everybody is a best-selling author these days.
Yes, yes.
I'm so proud of everyone for
I have
reaching
a
that
coupon for those.
for reaching that status. But I digress. I will leave that for a different episode. That will be the snarky outtakes episode that I put together.
You'll
Um,
have to send that to me.
oh, I will. Yes, we will. We'll do a co-hosting thing. Um, so again, just again, for people listening, it's like, we're in a situation now where you're going to be creating content. You're going to be doing your best, hopefully create the best, highest quality, most useful stuff you can in the context that you're competing with, like it's just insane the amount of noise. But thinking about now, okay, AI tools, right? Whatever the
Hmm.
tools are, um, it's not necessarily about it writing for you, but there is some really interesting stuff coming out now that can be helpful, right? So I
Hmm.
wanted to kind of like I'm gonna zip my lip and I'm gonna give you a chance to kind of take us on a tour. What have you been playing around with and experimenting with?
Um, it's funny. I'm just going to go back to what you said earlier that a lot of these tools have been around for quite some time. AI is not new. Chat, all of that existed even in my previous career. I mean, we had chat boxes, people talking. If you think about the ATM machines, there's AI in that. It's been around. It's just that now using it in the reference of content, it's all over the place. And how I use it is I started using it with just basic, okay, if I'm writing for a newsletter that I put out, check for grammar, cohesiveness, and structure. Okay, and it would kind of reframe exactly what I wrote, maybe give me a little bit more. Or when I'm having a little bit of a brain freeze of how do I tie this in? What's a good call to action for this content? It'll give me some highlights or some bullet points to use. And that's like, okay, great. Now, when I take that information, I don't just slap it onto my LinkedIn or my, post. I put it in, something a little bit more safe that I can digest it again and make it sound like me because I don't care what they say. If you buy the paid version of ChatGPT, it recognizes your voice and blah blah blah. But if you're not changing what you're putting in there, it's just recognizing what you put in there and not your own voice, if that makes sense. So I use it as an editing tool or a suggestion tool, but I use my own voice first. That's most important to me.
I want to drill down on that a little bit too, because I think it comes down now to the philosophical question of what you're trying to create to begin with. Forget the tools,
Right.
right? It's like video. We're creating an audio and a video podcast together. It's like the technology is just helping us express ourselves. What I love about
Right.
podcasting is we could do that in a very, hopefully, very genuine way, right? I mean,
Hmm.
like it's just very personable. We don't, in my opinion, want to lose that, right? We don't want to
No.
lose that essence, whatever that X factor is, that's going to be the thing that connects you with the right people. So I think that's
Right.
just a good thing to just kind of highlight right now is like, to use it to basically fill in some gaps or maybe make things a little quicker, right? But not as a replacement for who you are, especially if you're selling expertise or knowledge or insight and
Right.
things like that, right?
Right. I think one of the things that I've started to do more in content, and I'm very careful about it because I'm with my family and friends, I'm not guarded, but I share more authentically and vulnerably. On LinkedIn or any social media platform, I don't share my personal life in that way. First of all, I really don't It kind of bothers me when I see others do it, but that's their choice. I can move on. I don't see that anyone is really interested in, what I had for dinner last night, or, why I woke up with a headache, or any of those silly things that you sometimes see. But I do share a little bit of authentic as it relates to the story or the content that I'm about to write. And there's some people who are really brilliant about it. It's just brief, it's to the point, it's not too personal. And that I think is golden. You're not going to get that by using AI because they don't know your personal stories, and how you write it doesn't have to be SEO and, you know, focused and all these words. And I find now, using it more and more frequently, AI, you start to see canned words that they use that are almost a trigger to know, oh, this was written by AI. I've actually seen posts where people will say edited by AI. I'm like, what? Now I've made my bonehead mistakes as well, but that, to call it out, just seems a little weird.
Why? I mean, that's honest, I guess, but
It's
like that's like
honest, but
saying edited by word, you know, like spell checked through Google Docs. That's strange.
there's a lot of strange people
There's a
hanging out
lot. I think you
on
just kind of
social
broke
media.
my brain with that for a second. Hold on. I want to mention what you just said about SEO for people listening that don't like, they're not into this whole stuff. It's like, search engine optimization. And I want to bring that up because essentially it's if you write a blog post and you're using certain keywords or certain types of, it's always changing now, but it's essentially based on some keyword kind of algorithms, things. It's essentially, what's going to get you to the top of Google, right? So I want to take a back step on that real quick because this is something that's come up in conversations with me recently about SEO and the content. So I want to throw this out there and see how you feel about it, right?
Okay.
Um, SEO is wonderful. If you're going to write, if you're going to have a niche, if you're going to have something you want to become the person in something, like, yes, be aware of it. That said, I think that some of us are kind of inundated with these ideas that if we just get the SEO or the keywords right, or if we let ChatGPT write it for us, or whatever it is, that we're going to somehow rise to the top of Google searches when somebody types in leadership consulting. you know, yeah, you know what I'm saying. So
Yeah,
basically, like,
yep.
yeah. So if you do something very niche and you have a lot of content that's there's some optimization around the words you're using, and somebody's going to type in something very specific, yes, absolutely. There's a lot of opportunities there. I just think it's been kind of made this sales pitch by marketing companies. Are like, hey, we're gonna optimize your website for you. Oh, what do you do? Oh, well, I'm a life coach. Oh, yes, we'll do some optimization for life coach. I'm a marketer. This stuff all matters, but I also get crazy when I see things that really are like the odds of being at the top of a Google search for life coaching are essentially zero, unless you're Tony Robbins or the other dozen
The
people.
big eyes.
Yeah, you know. So anyway, that's my little rant. I have one
I
episode,
couldn't
so
agree with you
yeah.
more. If I had, um, if I had 100, because I don't want to say pennies, if I had $100 for every person that pitched to me about SEO, lead gen, web design, marketing, content, etc., I wouldn't have to work.
Could that be your full-time occupation? This
That would be my SEO
we
right
just
there. I'd be at the
when you
top
figure
of
out that
Google.
business model, please let me know because that sounds pretty lucrative.
Exactly, it is.
Yeah.
I feel like people approach us like we're all broken and we have no idea what we're doing.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like. And so I get that, talking about going back to content, the sales pitch content that comes in, I could rewrite it and send it to 5 other people. Just change the name. That's it. So you can really see that it's it's just as saturated as how many coaches are out there for different needs. has
Yeah.
to go with relationship. It's all about relationship. We're not a commodity that you can sell like widgets
And
or
nor would
airline
you want to
tickets.
be, right? You wouldn't
No,
want to be because
no,
there is, to your point, there's no shortage of trainers and consultants and coaches in every field, right?
that's right.
And it's my job to pay very close attention to what that looks like, right? And
Right.
it's kind of like a for a large part, it's like a shouting in the wind kind of. I don't even know if that's a real analogy, but like let's just say shouting in the wind, right? That's like how old I am, you know. He's shouting in the wind, but it's just like I'm going to post on threads 20 times a day, and I'm just going to post all these. It's like great, do it, but realize that ultimately, you know, when it comes to content, is it going to be platitudes that get people's attention? If you put like, hey, you have to believe in yourself, and you write that 10 times a day, 10 different ways, is that what people are lacking or missing? Maybe, but you're going to be working really hard to try to rise above the noise versus when you're creating content and you're solving problems and this all relates to each other that you're saying, look, I'm not going to be able to be the life coach for everybody. I'm not going to be able to be the person who talks about stories, negative stories for everybody, right?
That's right.
Because there's only one of me and I only have, $3 million a year to work with my marketing budget. Oh, wait, no, not that high. Forget that. It's not probably 3 million a year. So when you think about the content you write, and I know you and I have talked a little bit about the focusing and your messaging, and that all relates to each other. Uh, how do you approach that? Because again, it's tricky because you don't want to limit yourself too much, but at the same time, if you make it too generic and broad, it just becomes almost platitudes, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's a challenge for sure. Um, I've gotten a lot better. I've made huge progress. How do you write the content that speaks to a specific audience, not just the negative storytelling folks out there? Who is that persona in the company or individual? What industry are they in that I'd want to engage with or help? How would they relate to me? What's the problem? What's the outcome that I know or believe I can help them deliver or receive? So that's the tricky part. That's You don't want to sound salesy when you're writing content on LinkedIn, like, hey, check me out, book time. I mean, all of that stuff used to work 2 years ago, and now it doesn't work. And I've been on LinkedIn a long time. I used to scope creep candidates when I was a hiring manager of, hey, you want to come work with us? I see you have a great resume. Come on over. And that was my introduction. So I had a leg up when I was transitioning over because I knew how LinkedIn worked. Um, but to sound salesy on there was that's the wrong U-turn. That
Yeah.
is so wrong.
It's an important point again to kind of drill down on real quick because it's all these different angles of what is content, what makes it good versus bad, or effective versus ineffective. Content in general, when we talk about content marketing, is different from advertising, right? So if you go on LinkedIn
Yes.
now and for years, and I don't know even how effective this has ever been on LinkedIn, right? But there's stuff that's content that really is just like very poorly camouflaged advertising, right? It's like look how great we are, basically, right? But no, the content part of it that might be missing is it's what makes it content marketing, in my opinion, again, is you're educating somebody about something. They could take
Yeah.
that. This podcast is an example, right? Yes, of course I created this podcast for a reason, right? I mean, I love doing it, but it's like, come on, I'm not making $100 every time somebody pitches me on SEO. I don't have that kind of money, right? I'm doing this is
We're
part of what I do, but ultimately,
going to
if somebody
become multimillionaires when we figure out that
multi,
formula.
totally. Um, you heard it here first, folks. Uh, but somebody listens to this episode, whether they ever talk to me, whether they ever listen to another,
hopefully they get something useful out of it. That's the best I can
Hopefully,
hope for, right?
that's
Now,
right.
ideally, they get something really useful, and I really, oh, wouldn't it be great if they share it and go, oh, this is the most amazing podcast I've ever heard in my life. Yeah, that would be wonderful, right? But I'll keep it back down to reality. Ultimately, the intention of this is you and I are having a good time. We're talking about something we both care about, and you're sharing your experiences. This is useful for somebody, right? Somebody's going to listen to this
Absolutely.
and they're going to be like, oh, I never thought of it that way, or this gave me an idea, whatever it is. That is content marketing. Now, yes, in the show notes is going to be a thing. Hey, if you've hit a plateau and you're in da 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 da, and you like to sign up for my email, yes, of course. I want to give people the opportunity to be able to engage more. But you don't start with that, right? So again, we're going back to what's the philosophical essence of content marketing. And what you just mentioned is the tricky part is how do you focus that? And as your messaging, as your strategy and positioning is changing, you know, how have you seen that affect? Are you creating more content? Are you creating less content? Like, what is that? How does that look different now than it might have a year ago?
I I used to think that I was going to dance to my own drum, and I always do. Um, I started to do more content on LinkedIn. Um, I don't know what the right number is. Like you said, we still like spaghetti up a wall, which works, right? Um, so I do post 3 times a week, two shorter posts, Monday and Wednesday, just kind of food for thought. And then my longer post, which is a word of the week on Friday, and it gives a little bit more content. Um, I've been doing this now for about 2, 3 months, maybe. So we'll see. It doesn't happen overnight necessarily. I do see that some people who I haven't seen or spoken to in a long time will like a post that, it's been over 10 years, 15 years since I've worked with this person, and they're responding and they don't like anything else. So, or not that they don't like, but they're not responding to anything else. So we'll see. It is I guess a crapshoot. You have to kind of see whether what works. Different platforms, there's Instagram and Twitter and X and everything else. It's just so much noise, so much digital noise, what to keep up with, and the style that you have to post here, and what do you do here. I'm not a fan of all of that, to be honest with you, but I'm in this phase and trajectory right now to see whether this is I'm getting more traction. Am I getting more connections that are meaningful? Right now, in the beginning, I'm still getting people who are in the same industry. It's great to collaborate with them, but how many more coaches do I need to collaborate with about the same thing? I have coaches that are like, I think you and I had this conversation. I have coaches who are trying to sell me, are you stressed? Are you, do you find that you are, losing energy, imposter syndrome? I'm thinking, did you not even read my profile?
No, they didn't. I'll answer that for you. They did not. Which now you're going to set me off on a whole nother tangent about that. Oh, so many trigger warnings. I should have given myself a trigger warning today before we started. No, they don't look, and that's again goes back to the danger of scaling. You have like I'll give you a quick example. Like I just started doing something with Podmatch, which helps you find guests for podcasts, right? And there's not a lot on my page. It just says like, here's what I'm looking for, right? And it's essentially right now I'm looking for people that are in this coaching or training space or consulting space who either have a marketing challenge that they'd love to have somebody help them unpack, right? Or they have some tips, they have some things that have worked, right? It's very clear. I've gotten probably 30 responses now, and two of them have actually said anything about what I wrote on there. The rest of it are just copy and paste pitches, right? And the other one, the one that came in yesterday, literally still had your company and then the dot 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 for where they would fill in the company name.
Stop it.
And
I mean, it is insane. This is, I had a podcast for a year, and I noticed that I was doing the spaghetti up against the wall thing, and people were reaching out to me as professional coaches, life coaches, career coaches. And I'm like, yeah, I'll have people on. It's great to have a banter of conversation, whatever. But then I realized, look, it's fun to do this. but at the same token, you're looking for people who you could possibly help, or that somebody's going to listen and help. And to be brutally honest, why I even said that, I don't know. I'm going to be honest anyway, but the person who's listening, who's my guest, is promoting themselves. So how does that help me as the guest? Got to kind of have a little opposite there.
Well, there is a symbiotic relationship in all this. But to your point earlier, it's like if you all you do is spend your time networking with other people in the same space, it's wonderful to have these friendships and maybe that support system, but it's not necessarily a business building endeavor. Um,
Correct.
and that's again, thinking strategically about this stuff, it is a balance. There's no paradox or there's no conflict between selling well and serving. It's one and the same thing. So you can figure out like, hey, you can put out content. You're like, I'm here to solve people's problems and help them solve this problem. And that's how I make a living. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't want to say there should be no conflict internally for people because they're going to have their own thing that they have to work through. But when you're thinking about the strategy of this, it's like, it's not about giving away for the sake of, oh, you're not doing this for any other reason. This is part of what you do, right? So when you're creating content, you're being generous, but you're being generous in a very strategic way so that you can continue doing the work that you do best, right? And so you can get clients
100%.
and you can build your business on. It's a wonderful thing to be able to share, right? And if you're doing it authentically, if you're creating podcasts and you love doing it, like we both obviously do, we like this, right? We wouldn't be doing this if we didn't like it. It can be fun, and it can be
Yeah.
fun, it can be profitable, and other people can benefit from it, and it all happens at the same time. Um, as we close out, last couple of minutes, one thing I thought of and I wanted to get your perspective of is, when people think of content marketing, it's easy to just think of it as this inbound thing, right? So I post on LinkedIn, somebody sees it on LinkedIn that I've never met before, right? And then they find me through that. That's great, or through the podcast. But another thing that content marketing is very useful for, very important, especially with coaching, consulting, and training, where it's all about credibility. It's all about, what you're bringing, right? Who you are. Is that people that might find you through a referral, right? They didn't even know you existed on a podcast, but now they go to your website or they go to your LinkedIn and they start scrolling and checking you out. And just the fact that you have a podcast, just the fact that you've been posting on LinkedIn might be the thing that makes them go, yeah, okay, they're legit. I could see whatever it is. They might not even read it, right? Have you
It's
ever
a
seen that?
credibility tag.
Yeah. Have you ever seen that yourself?
Yes. I did have a conversation with somebody recently, um, who I met at a restaurant. And I was sitting down reffing with a colleague, and she walked by, and then she came back and asked for a business card. So that was great. That was outside of LinkedIn. So networking does happen outside of the big blue and white box there. Um, and she came back, and we were having the Zoom call, and she was asking questions, and she was giving me her, her reason for reaching out or whatever. And she went to the website and she says, "Oh, and I see that you talk about X, Y, and Z." So there was something specific that spoke to her. But a lot of times they're not reading all of that. They're looking to see if you have a credibility card.
And especially with the LinkedIn or the social part is that social proof, right? So I
Yeah,
not to get into vanity metrics, but there is it's compelling if somebody sees that you have a lot of followers. It just is, right? We're just
yeah,
wired for that. So just keep
yeah.
that in mind for people listening. It's like it's not necessarily that you're gonna always get inbound leads from it. It's just the fact that you have this kind of library of content that just only builds your own credibility. To close us out for people listening that like they maybe they post a little bit on LinkedIn, but they're dipping their toes in the content ocean as it were. Where would you recommend they start? They're selling relatively, let's say B2B. They're not life coaches, they're consultants, trainers, they're business coaches. What would be a good starting point you'd recommend for them?
I will give what someone shared with me is learn to navigate LinkedIn. Um, your profile is really important. Your titles. Someone who does a lot of LinkedIn um, work, if you will, gave me a really great tip about, and I've seen it happen more and more, about your title. Your title shouldn't, it used to be like, okay, I am a leadership coach. Now it's more about, I help people, blah, blah, blah. So it's almost like giving the story right there. Start there. And then the about section, mine is a little outdated. It has to be updated again. But it's a work in progress, that you make sure that your about section is compelling. I also think that start small on your post, maybe get a schedule together. One thing I don't know that is right or wrong is that I don't schedule a lot out beforehand. So my posts that I do on Friday, I haven't even thought about what it's going to be. And I had people ask, well, what's the word of the week going to be next week? It's like, so they know, people know that, oh, I'm the word of the week. It may come to me tomorrow. It may come Friday morning. And then I'm writing, because it could be an experience. It could be something I've just said, something I read, something I heard. So sometimes start with just something small to post about what you're passionate about or whatever. I'm not a real fan of forwarding messages, forwarding, like an article or something like that. But that could be a way to start. Add your input to, if you're following a group, whatever that group is that really talks to, the business that you're in. Hey, interesting article, etc. That's a great way to just kind of get your feet wet and things like that. LinkedIn is continuously changing. I know we spoke about it. I wrote a post that now, there's so many different things that they're not allowing you to do. You can't do creative mode anymore, so you can't write a full article. You have to do it a different way. I think the first step is to really get familiar with the ins and outs of LinkedIn before you start posting stuff.
Special thanks to Michele Delgado for sharing her insights about using content marketing to attract your ideal clients. If you enjoyed the show, I hope you'll consider subscribing and leaving a review. And don't forget to visit marcusschaller.com/subscribe for weekly troubleshooting guides and tips to help you find and fix the weak spots in your marketing that are holding you back, fine-tune your positioning and marketing strategy, and start growing again by attracting more of your ideal clients. Again, that's marcusschaller.com/subscribe.